It's August 29, 2025, as people gathered in the Bragan Bog in Blackwater Town in the Irish county of Monaghan. It's here where it is believed that Columba McVeigh was buried after being killed. But it's a large bog, and digs have been ongoing for years, yielding few results. On this day, there was no digging. People were gathered to mark the International Day of the Disappeared. During the Troubles in Northern Ireland, around 17 people were forcibly disappeared. They were taken, killed, and never seen again, buried in a secret location known to only a few paramilitaries. Some families have spent decades fighting to find out where their loved ones ended up. Some wanted to forget and move on, but it was never easy. The uncertainty of not knowing where your child, sibling, or parent was. There's a term for it: ambiguous loss. Over the past 2 decades, many of these bodies have been found. In many cases, it was too late, and the parents had died first, never knowing what became of their child, and never having a body with which to grieve. And to this day, families continue to search for those who have never been found. This is the story of the disappeared. This is the Troubles podcast, a podcast about the violence and bloodshed that occurred in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and Great Britain, as multiple sides and organisations waged a conflict over the status of Northern Ireland. The idea of disappearing someone is not something unique to the Troubles. People disappeared for a variety of reasons, and in Ireland this has been ongoing for centuries. In the case of the Troubles, it usually occurred if the person was suspected of informing, which in the eyes of the paramilitaries really is the lowest of the low and a betrayal of your own community. Between 1971 and 1978, 79 alleged informers were killed. Many were shot in the head, and their bodies were dumped publicly, sometimes with tout written on them, or coins put in their hands to symbolise why they sold out their community. In some cases, taped confessions were extracted and then shown to family members as proof of informing. These public executions were often warnings to the community. If you inform, this will happen to you. So why then were people also disappeared? Disappearing someone was done if the killing would be particularly controversial. Killing a single mother, for example, or killing a teenage boy, or killing someone with intellectual disabilities. If they disappeared and there was no body, there was always the tiny chance that they simply left. This delayed any police investigation, who often did not believe that the person had been abducted and killed in secret. It also gave a glimmer of hope to victims' families. In some cases, the IRA would even send postcards to family members from different countries, implying that the person had left the country, like in the case of Jean McConville. There are a few individuals where we simply don't know why they were disappeared, but in other cases it's more clear. And to this day, family members still campaign that their loved one was not an informer and not betraying their own. To some, during the Troubles, it was a deep mark of shame that would leave a family ostracised for decades. Generally, 17 people are considered to have been disappeared during the Troubles, but it's a bit of a loose figure and I'll explain why soon. In this episode, I'll be going through all 17 cases, and there's one additional one I'll be covering which occurred after the Troubles. The primary source for this episode is the book The Disappeared: Forced Disappearances in Ireland, 1798 to 1998, by Pádraig Ó O'Rourke, published by Merriam Press. I think by now, most listeners would have probably read Say Nothing or seen the TV show that came out, which focused on the killing of Jean McConville, but also the disappearance of Joe Linsky and Kevin McKee. We'll begin with Joe Linsky. The first person to be disappeared during the Troubles was Joe Linsky. He was a 40-year-old veteran of the IRA, having joined as early as 1950. Before that, he was a Cistercian monk and spent 6 years studying at a monastery in Waterford. When the IRA split in 1969, Linsky took the side of the Provisionals. He then became an intelligence officer for the Provisional IRA's Belfast Brigade. He was well liked by his peers and had the nickname the Mad Monk. Joe ended up losing his life as a result of womanizing. He had been engaged in a long-term affair with another IRA member's wife and decided he wanted to get him out of the picture. Claiming that he was informing, Linsky ordered a young IRA member to execute the husband. So on the 18th of June 1972, the IRA member knocked on the door and the husband answered, with his young child in his arms. The IRA member panicked and shot him in the stomach, wounding him. The injured man made his way to a Republican drinking club where he raised the alarm with the Dark, aka Brendan Hughes. Hughes and his men started asking around, and Linsky told them that the attack was carried out by the official IRA. Hughes made his way to an official IRA drinking club and took captive some of the members there. Civilian Desmond Mackin tried to intervene and prevent this and was shot in the legs. Patrons pleaded with the provisionals to let them bring Mackin to a hospital, but this was prevented and he bled to death on the floor of the pub. The provisionals soon realised that the attempted killing was actually carried out by one of their own, which had now led to the death of a man and nearly caused a feud to break out between the officials and the provisionals. For this, Joe would have to die. I've covered her in detail a lot in previous episodes, but Dolores Price was in a very secretive group within the provisionals known as the Unknowns. In the years before she died, Dolores was remarkably candid about her time in the IRA and gave some really unique insights into the inner workings of the group. She was tasked with driving Joe across the border to where he would eventually be executed. Price recalls driving Joe, quote, "Joe Linsky was an extremely gentle gentleman. He made a horrendous and grave mistake, which I believe came from his naivety. He'd gone off to be a monk and he was a mature man, but was in many ways immature. When it came to light what Joe had done, I was given the task of bringing him across the border and leaving him in the hands of the people who would deal with him. He came in the car with me and he tried to explain with me what had happened, and I said, I don't want to know, Joe. I just have this very difficult thing to do. And he apologised to me for being responsible for my having to take him, and he brought a little overnight bag with him, which I thought was very sad and pathetic because he sat with it on his knee. As I was driving down, I thought, why doesn't he do something to run away and save himself? But I realised his loyalty and his dedication to the movement was such that he accepted his fate. I knew Joe had done wrong. I couldn't have seen any other sentence for him other than that, and now I think he's accepted his fate fully. He shook my hand and he thanked me for driving him, and I said, well, I'll see you, Joe, and knowing full well I wouldn't see him again. Joe was killed, and then he was buried somewhere in the Republic of Ireland. For years afterwards, Joe's family thought that he had moved to the USA, after several of his friends told them that he had moved. It was only in 2010 that they learned the truth, that he had been killed and secretly buried. Writer Ed Maloney was about to release his book, Voices from the Grave, and he wanted to let Joe's family know what he discovered before the book was released. Quote, Maloney was asked if we knew that Joe was one of the disappeared, and that he was the first to disappear. We simply had no idea and had never made that connection. We believed those that had told us they had seen him after he disappeared, and had just assumed that he didn't want to get in touch. Family members had tried to find out information about his whereabouts, but we never thought he was dead. As of writing, the exact whereabouts of Joe's remains have never been discovered. It is believed that because of his religion, he requested to be buried in consecrated grounds. And in November 2024, it was revealed that a grave in a graveyard in a small village in County Monaghan was being exhumed, and that there was an additional body in the grave. Unfortunately, the DNA of the body was not a match for Joe. The search still continues. Which brings us to the point, who carries out these searches? The Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains, otherwise known as the Disappeared Commission, which was established by treaty between the United Kingdom and Ireland, and is dedicated to finding the remaining bodies of the disappeared. The Commission has a significant scope and is heavily focused on getting back the remains of those killed, by removing any legal stumbling blocks that may exist. Any information and evidence that they receive regarding the location of the bodies is inadmissible in courts, which means nobody can be prosecuted for providing evidence. This is a double-edged sword for many victims' families. Yes, it will get the remains of their loved ones back, but there is a chance that the person providing the information took part in the killing of their loved one and is immune from prosecution for providing this information. As well as that, all the information provided to them is provided in secret and can only be shared with victims' families. They have the power to search anywhere in Northern Ireland, and over the past decade, most of the searches have taken place in bogs in the Republic of Ireland. In this episode, I'll be focusing on all of the cases that the Disappeared Commission have been involved in. The next two people to have been disappeared happened just 2 months after Joe, in October 1972. 25-year-old Seamus Wright and 17-year-old Kevin McKee were abducted and accused of being informants for the British Army's Secret Military Reaction Force, or MRF. In the case of Seamus, he was a member of the Provisional IRA in Belfast, and in February 1972, his home was raided by soldiers and he was taken away. For the next few weeks, there was no sign of him. The soldiers told his wife that he had been released. Then she began to receive letters from Manchester and London, where Wright apparently wrote that he said he was working laying asphalt. She called the companies who he claimed to be working for, who told her that he wasn't working for them. It would appear that the MRF recruited him during this month, and he spent his time inside an armoured car which was driving around Belfast. The army was using him to secretly look out gun slots in the vehicle and identify known provisionals around the city, who would then be arrested, interrogated and interned. The letters were an attempt to make it look like he had been travelling for work. In 2020, Kieran McCart and his fantastic charity Paper Trail discovered proof that Seamus had been recruited and then discharged just over a month later. He was discharged in March and then was immediately interrogated by the Provisional IRA. He confessed and told them everything and all about the inner workings of the MRF in Palace Barracks, which consisted of 2 sections. One which was where the plain-clothed undercover soldiers operated, and the other which housed the Freds, named after the British comic strip about a male basset hound, and it was here where the turned terrorists were housed, as they were referred to. It was during this interrogation where Seamus said that he had seen another IRA member, 17-year-old Kevin McKee, there. Kevin wore a pistol with a shoulder holster and was quite popular with the soldiers. He was subsequently lifted by the Provisionals and soon admitted to his work with the MRF. He then provided them with information regarding how the MRF operated, driving a fake laundry van around Belfast, which housed soldiers taking photos and gathering intel. As a result of Kevin's information, the IRA staged an attack on the van, killing one undercover soldier, Ted Stewart. It would appear that both men thought that they were safe from being killed by the IRA. Seamus thought by telling them about Kevin he was safe, and Kevin thought that he was going to become a triple agent of sorts, pretending to still be an MRF informer. But for the Provisional IRA, for their transgression, they had to die. On the same day as the shooting of the laundry van, a car appeared outside the home of Seamus. His wife saw him talking outside with the men, and he then got into the car and was never seen alive again. Seamus and Kevin were taken to an IRA safe house and kept there for a number of weeks, before being driven to a bog in Meath, in the Republic of Ireland. They were then told that they were to be executed. One of the executioners is quoted saying of Kevin McKee, "He was naive, he was brash, and you know he enjoyed his notoriety, his immunity, but what I will never understand is that he accepted his death as if it were a fact of life." The men were both shot in the head and buried in a shallow grave in County Meath. Brendan Hughes was furious when he heard about this, as the men were told that they had been given immunity. Their bodies lay undiscovered for decades, and the IRA didn't reveal what had become of them until the late 1990s. Acting off an anonymous tip as to the whereabouts of Joe Linsky, archaeologists working on behalf of the Disappeared Commission carried out a dig at Coggle Island in County Meath in June 2015. But instead of finding Linsky, they found the bodies of Kevin and Seamus. Speaking at the inquest, Kevin's sister Philomena testified saying, "I remember going out looking for him with Mam. She used to sit, waiting for him to come home. When Kevin was taken, he was hardly more than a child. His mother never got over it, and while it wasn't until after the nearly 40 years of mental torture that she died, in reality, they may as well have murdered her when they put Kevin in that hole in County Meath in 1972. But now Kevin is with his mummy in a Christian grave where he should be. He can now rest in peace. We are truly grateful for that. Seamus Maguire was the next person to be disappeared. He was a 26-year-old man from Agagalan. He didn't have any connection to paramilitary activity and was described as harmless. He was known to debate politics publicly and talk about the activities of the Republican paramilitaries, which angered them. It's believed that he was warned to cut out the loose talk, sometime around 1973. O'Rourke then writes in his book that in September of that year, he was having a drink in his local when he was approached by two men who led him out the side entrance of the pub. There, a car was waiting for him. A scuffle ensued and Seamus was bungled into the car and never seen again. O'Rourke writes that he disappeared in 1973, but there has been some new information which has come out in recent years, and the Disappeared Commission now believe that he worked in Manchester around that time and was actually killed and secretly buried in 1976. To this day, his remains have never been found, but it's believed that he is buried near his hometown in the Agagalan Derryclone area, and the next search for his body will begin in spring of 2026. Jean McConville was the next person to be disappeared, and her killing would be considered one of the most well-known and controversial of the entire Troubles. I've covered it in detail in a previous episode, so do check that out if you want a more in-depth version. Jean McConville was a Protestant woman who married Catholic man Arthur McConville, converting to Catholicism in 1952. The two had 10 children together and initially lived on Beersbridge Road in Belfast, which was a predominantly loyalist area. As the Troubles kicked off, they were told to convert to Protestantism or leave the area. They left and secured a flat in the Divis Tower complex. Arthur then died in 1972, leaving Jean to raise the children herself. She was not popular with her neighbours in Divis Flats. The flats were seen as a provisional IRA stronghold of sorts, and most people who lived there were sympathetic to the IRA. The current narrative as to why Jean was unpopular stems back to a couple of stories. One saying that she came to the aid of an injured soldier who was outside her flat. But over the years, this story has been disputed, and it may have been somebody else who helped an injured soldier and not Jean. Jean also refused to take part in the Chain, which was a way for provisional IRA members to use civilians to pass weapons along the windows from flat to flat, to conceal them from British Army searches. It's hard to pinpoint the date for what follows, but it's believed that at some point she was found in possession of a British Army radio or transmitter, and people in Divis Flats began to suspect her of informing. She was taken and sternly warned against continuing to inform. And then there was an incident in which Jean was at the local bingo hall when she was called out, after someone told her that one of her children was injured and a car was there to bring her to the hospital. This was all a trap, and Jean was actually taken away by the IRA and interrogated. She was then found wandering the streets of Belfast in the early hours of the morning after being beaten. It would appear that after this she continued to inform, and the final nail in the coffin for her was when an IRA member was arrested and taken into a barracks and presented in front of a person concealed with a sheet. The sheet stopped short of the person's feet, and the IRA member recognised the slippers as those belonging to Jean. It should be noted that there has never been any proof that she was informing, apart from these stories, and many of the McConville children completely dismissed the claims. But shortly after these incidents, a decision was made by leadership in the IRA to have her killed. It's unclear when the following events happened. One McConville child says that the following events happened one night after the bingo hall attack, which police reports say happened on the 29th of November 1972. Other sources say it happened on December 7th. Either way, it was 7 p.m. in the evening, and Jean had just gotten out of the bath. She had sent her daughter Helen out to get fish and chips for dinner. As Helen was on her way back, she saw something strange: a group of people loitering outside her apartment. Fearing that something was wrong, she broke into a run. Back at the flat, there was a knock on the door before a large group of people barged into the flat. Some were wearing balaclavas, and some were without them, and they were shouting, "Where is she?" Jean emerged and they told her to come with them. She began to scream, shouting, help me," surrounded by her children. Her son Michael recalls recognising two of the kidnappers as two young girls who used to be their neighbours. And her eldest son Archie went with her until they pointed a gun at his head and ordered him to leave. They told the children that she would be back to them in half an hour. Jean was placed in the back of a van and she was never seen again. Agnes McConville remembers her mother wearing red shoes and a tweedy coat on the day she was disappeared. She used to always have a safety pin somewhere on her coat, as there was always a baby's nappy that needed changing, and she would use the safety pin to fasten it together. Michael remembers then, around 5 days later, an IRA man came to the door and gave him Jean's purse and her wedding rings. He asked about his mother, to which the man replied, "Look, I was just told to give these rings to you. I know nothing about it." Michael, who was 11 at the time, mentions he then received a direct threat from the IRA. Say nothing, or else. In the days after the attack, there was radio silence. No neighbours came by, no police, and the children were left to fend for themselves. In all likelihood, everyone in the flats knew that their mother had been taken, but people wanted nothing to do with the children of an informer. They were tainted. On the police side, very little investigation took place during the 70s and the 80s. The RUC had received an anonymous tip that she had absconded with a British soldier and decided not to look into things further. So it wasn't until 1995 that her abduction and disappearance was first investigated. So what we know about the McConville kidnapping? We know that Dolores Price drove McConville across the border, where she was executed by gunshot to the head. Then, in 1999, legislation was passed, providing immunity to those who gave information regarding the whereabouts of the disappeared, like I mentioned earlier. This led to information being received as to the whereabouts of Jean's body. And a search began on a beach in the Irish county of Louth, just across the border into the Republic of Ireland, but no body was found. Then, in 2003, a man was out walking his dog near the original search location and came across a piece of fabric in the sand. He then discovered bones and realised that he had found a human body. The coroner reported that the body was that of a woman and it had been in the sand for an advanced length of time. There was also a single gunshot to the back of the head. The adult McConville children were brought into a room where the remains of the bones and surviving articles of clothing were laid out on the table for them to identify. There were tights, underwear, the remains of a skirt and parts of a shoe. Jean's son Archie then asked, "Is there a nappy pin?" remembering how his mother used to always have a spare safety pin pinned to her clothes. After looking again, there it was, pinned to a corner of the fabric. Jean McConville had been found 31 years after she was taken. Because her body was found by a member of the public and not as a result of the information provided by the IRA, this meant that the case was still open and the killers could still be prosecuted. How much could be found out 31 years after the crime has occurred? Not too much. Though Jerry Adams was arrested in 2014 in connection with the killing, but he was released without being charged and has categorically denied being involved in the killing of Jean McConville. As adults, the McConville children still saw the people who barged into their flat and abducted their mother. Not all of the abductors were wearing masks and some were recognisable. In one instance, Michael McConville got into a taxi and the taxi driver was one of the men who took his mother. Another time, Helen McConville went into a McDonald's and bumped into one of the women who had been there that night. The next person to be disappeared was Peter Wilson, who was described as a vulnerable man with learning disabilities. His sister said that he was a boy in a man's body, and he grew up fascinated with the British Army, saying that he wanted to join them. He ended up spending around 5 days in one of the barracks nearby, and when he came out he told his family that he had joined the army. He had even cut his hair short like British soldiers. This was a nationalist area, and you really didn't want to announce to people that you were joining the army. But the soldiers did keep him in the barracks for 5 days, under the guise of showing him the ropes. In reality, the army wanted to use him to identify known Republicans in the area. But again, he was described as having the mental age of a child, so it's doubtful that his information was very useful to them. On the 1st of August 1973, Peter went outside to play football and never returned. It would appear that he was abducted by the IRA, who accused him of being an informer. He was then executed and secretly buried. Peter was only added to the list of the disappeared in 2009, and shortly afterwards a tip-off was provided, which led investigators to the Red Bay beach near the village of Waterfoot in Armagh. Peter's body was discovered in November 2010, 37 years after he was disappeared. His family used to walk on that very beach, completely unaware that he was buried there. When questioned about exploiting him and hiring him as an informer, the army denied this, stating that they wanted him to experience military life before he was enlisted. Eamon Malloy was a 22-year-old man from Belfast who rose to the rank of quartermaster within the Provisional IRA. It would appear that he had been turned by the security services and had begun giving information to them regarding other provisionals. Apparently, the information he provided led to the arrests of between 25 to 30 men. And it's only when they gathered in prison to talk about who it could be, they realised it was Malloy. He disappeared in 1975, and his brother Michael recalled that the family didn't know he was even missing. They just thought he was getting on with his life. Eventually, the Provisional IRA issued a statement in 1999, stating that he had been court-martialed and convicted of being an informer. Then, in May, a priest walked into the Dundalk Garda station, saying that he had been given information regarding the whereabouts of Malloy's body. An officer and the priest made their way to Old Foggart Graveyard, where a coffin was waiting for them. Inside were the remains of Eamon Malloy. He had been shot once in the back of the head. In 1975, Columba McVeigh was a young man from Dungannon, in the Northern Irish county of Tyrone. He was described by his brother as very easygoing. He played GAA and was also into theatre and dancing. He spent a lot of time in the nearby village of Coal Island, as he was pursuing a girl there. During this period, MI5 were recruiting informers, and it would appear that they were pursuing him, trying to recruit him as an informer. They wanted him to infiltrate the local IRA, and it would seem that the idea was poorly thought out, which would lead to disastrous consequences for McVeigh. British Army officer Captain Fred Holroyd described him as a very simple lad and explained that the plan was for the army to pretend to find some ammunition in his bedroom. McVeigh would then go on the run and make contact with the IRA in an attempt to join them. He was told to make contact with a priest who the army suspected of having ties with the Provisionals. He met with the priest, who smelled that something was afoot and wanted nothing to do with him. Then, not knowing where to go, McVeigh presented himself to the RUC police station to ask his handler what to do next. Your handler usually was the only person who knew your identity, and meetings like this would never really take place in the station in front of all the other officers. So the police at the station were very confused. Columba was sent to Crumlin Road Jail, where he was beaten up by the Provisionals, who knew something was off about him. He eventually confessed that he was involved with the security services, and then O'Rourke writes in his book that he promised to give the Provisionals a list of names of people working with the British. The list was given to them, then was sent out of the prison in a coded letter. It would appear that the entire list was nonsense, but McVeigh had named his Protestant milkman at the top. In 1975, he was given a suspended sentence, which, in the eyes of the Provisional IRA, was a death sentence. For the charges McVeigh was facing, getting a suspended sentence guaranteed that he was working with the British. He was released and fled Northern Ireland to Dublin, where he got a job as a painter. Meanwhile, while trying to target the milkman that McVeigh named, another milkman, Samuel or Christopher Mine, was captured by the IRA, held down and shot directly in the head. Then, back in Dublin, on Halloween night in 1975, McVeigh went to the pub and never returned. Again, no real investigation was launched. His mother thought, or hoped, that he had fled to England or the USA. And every year she bought birthday presents for him, hoping one day that he'd arrive at her door with a wife and child. It wasn't until 1991 that McVeigh's brother discovered that he had been killed. He bought a copy of Martin Dillon's The Dirty War, and he went to the index at the back of the book and saw his brother's name, and he learned that McVeigh had been shot and secretly buried. His mother Vera pleaded with reporters, saying it would be nice to be able to bury him properly before she died. This didn't happen, and she passed away in 2007. Searches were carried out for McVeigh's body in 2003, 2011, 2012. Then in September 2018, Bragan Bog in Monaghan became the new search location. It was searched again in October 2022, and then this year in 2025. November of this year marks 50 years since he was disappeared, and his sister Dymphna penned a very personal piece in the Belfast Telegraph. Quote, "People go missing all the time, we were told. Perhaps he'd gone to England for another job. Maybe he's gone to America with a girlfriend. I don't know if my mum and dad got hope from the perhaps and the maybes. I doubt it. I remember once I thought I saw him at Mass, and my mum made me go back every week to the same Mass and wait at the back in case I saw him again. Mum and Dad were devastated by the silence as year followed year. And then we were told in 1999, 24 long years later, that Columba was never coming home. And that opened up another whole new chapter of pain and despair. Columba was born on September 27th, 1955. He was murdered 20 years later. But that wasn't the end. Until we are able to bring him home and give him a Christian burial, and to know that he rests beside our mum and dad, this torment is not ended. I still have hope. If I didn't have hope, what would I have? Hope is what motivates me to still campaign and lobby for Columba and the other disappeared every chance I get. But the pain never goes away. There are tears every day of my life behind a mask of normality. Getting out of bed to start a new day, every day, and Columba is the first thought in my head. And then the mask is the second thought in my head. Parenting my kids as best as I could. Smiling at the neighbours, going to work and making a living. Always with a mask on my face and tears in my eyes and a heaviness in my heart. My mum, when she prayed for Columba, put him in with the prayers for the living. I put him in with the prayers for the dead. This is exactly how we were, in limbo, stuck in the middle and not knowing where he lay. It's a horrible place to be. For years I could not go near Bragan Bog. Seared into my brain is the image of Columba being taken across that desolate place in the cold and the dark. I can hear him crying out for his mum. It's still hard to go there, but I do. I have to. We want Columba home. We want him buried with my mum and dad. His name is already on the gravestone. My purpose is to get the information we need to find him. My purpose is to not let those who know where he is rest easy or forget. We must find him. Robert Nairac is perhaps one of the most enigmatic figures to have been operating during the Troubles. To this day, it's unclear exactly what he was involved with and to what extent. He was born in Mauritius in 1948 to a Catholic father and Protestant mother. He lived in England, but spent many of his summers in Spiddal in Galway in the Republic of Ireland, and he had a deep fascination for Irish culture. He studied at the British Army's Royal Military Academy and then served in the Grenadier Guards, being deployed to Belfast. He was then later transferred to the intelligence unit, where he ended up acting as liaison between the RUC and British Army. Nairac was a very unusual character and seems to operate completely independently of anyone else. He would sometimes patrol in uniform, but other times would don a beret and patrol dressed as a provisional. He is suspected as to have been involved in the Miami showband killings, as survivors recall hearing a, quote, rather posh English accent at the scene. A 2019 investigation provides an alibi for this, saying that he was actually in England during these attacks. On the 14th of May 1977, Nairac walked into the 3 Steps Inn in the village of Drummondtree. He was plain-clothed and claimed that his name was Danny from Belfast. It's unclear, but he may have been there to meet with an informer. Nairac ended up on the stage of the pub, singing the Irish rebel song The Broad Black Brimmer. For many in the pub, he came across as extremely suspicious. His accent was off, and he was making many trips to the bathroom. A local woman was asked to dance with him at one stage, so she could check to see if he was armed. There are conflicting reports here. One mentions that she discovers a gun, and the other mentions that he left his gun back in the car. After the band finished playing, Nairac was approached by a local man who asked him to step outside. He was then set upon by 3 people. He tried to make it back to his car, where he could have pressed a panic button of sorts, which would have alerted the soldiers in the nearby barracks. But he was overpowered and bundled into a car and driven away. He was then interrogated and beaten, and one of the men pretended to be a priest to see if they could get him to confess. Nairac only said to the man, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." A provisional IRA member then arrived at the scene, and Nairac was shot and killed. As to what happened to his body, we still don't know to this day. One of the rumours which grew legs was that his body was fed into an industrial meat grinder and then fed to animals. The Disappeared Commission investigated this in 2019 and found no factual evidence to support it. Funnily enough, I had a listener reach out in 2021 saying that they were a prison officer in Portlaoise prison during the Troubles, and there was an inmate there who couldn't stand the dim blue lights in the prison that were on during the night. When asked about it, he said it reminded him of the night that Nairac was fed into the meat grinder. Again, there is no way to verify these claims. In reality, Nairac is probably buried in a bog, beach or forest somewhere in the Republic of Ireland. The lead investigator of the 2019 investigation said, quote, "We know that he was buried, and we understand that his body was then moved from that location and reburied somewhere else." Nairac's case is an interesting one though, because though there was no body, somebody was still prosecuted for the killing. Liam Townsend was convicted of killing Nairac and served 13 years in prison. And as of writing, Robert Nairac's body has yet to be found. Brendan McGraw was a Catholic man from Belfast. He married Marie in 1977, and the two moved into an apartment in Andersontown. In August, he witnessed the aftermath of a gun battle between the Provisional IRA and the British Army. The manager of the Andersontown Social Club, John McCartan, had been killed in the crossfire between the two groups. Brendan gave a witness statement to the RUC, who were investigating McCartan's death. He and Marie moved to a different apartment, and Brendan worked first in a carpet factory and then on a cruise ship which sailed between Belfast and the Netherlands. On Saturday, April 8, 1978, Marie had a knock on the door. Brendan had gone into the city with his mother and wasn't home. She opened the door to a group of around 10 masked men. They were wearing stocking masks and rubber gloves. They pushed their way into her apartment and told her that they were going to inject her with a sedative. She pleaded with them not to, saying that she was 2 months pregnant and it could harm the baby inside her. One of the men said that she would be fine, and they held her down and gave her an injection in the arm. She began to feel drowsy. When Brendan returned home, he was brought to see his wife, who had not been harmed by the men. She recalls him saying, "I'll go with you, I've got nothing to hide. I didn't do anything." Brendan was put in a car and driven away and never seen alive again. The Provisional IRA admitted to killing him in 1999, claiming that he was a member of the British intelligence unit, the MRF. This has never been proven, and his family strenuously deny the allegations to this day. His body was finally discovered in 2014 in the Orristown Bog in County Meath, 36 years after he was taken. He had a gunshot wound to the forehead with an exit wound out the neck. To this day, we do not know why Brendan was disappeared. The next two to have been disappeared are Brian McKinney and John McClory. In 1978, a group of armed raiders broke into the Clubhouse Bar in Belfast. This was a bar which IRA members often drank at. The IRA investigated the break-in and honed in on Brian McKinney and John McClory. McKinney was 22 and had been diagnosed with developmental issues as a child. I've seen one quote saying that he had a mental age of 6. McClory was 18. The men were held for 2 days and eventually confessed to taking part in the break-in, and they were released. McClory revealed that it was he who had sourced a gun which was used in the break-in, which he had stolen from an IRA weapons dump. After the men were released, their parents paid back the share of the money that they had stolen and believed that this was the end of it. But in May of that year, on the same day, both men disappeared. Trying to find answers, Brian's father went and spoke to somebody high up in the IRA, who said that the IRA had taken them and he knew that his son was probably already dead. John's family held on to hope after they were told that he had been spotted at the 1978 Mexican World Cup. But again, This was all obfuscation. In 1999, the Provisional IRA admitted that they had killed the two men because they had stolen weapons from an arms dump. They then provided a location. In June of that year, digging began at a bog in Colga in County Monaghan. After digging for 4 weeks, the search was unsuccessful and investigators were losing hope. But then intermediaries in the IRA told them to widen their search to the left and the right of their original location. The ground to the left was too shallow to hold a body, so the team moved right and discovered a leg bone with a shoe attached, 2 foot underground and 80 yards away from where they'd began to dig. The dig was halted until a state pathologist arrived, who supervised the unearthing of the remains. Brian McKinney and John McClory's bodies were recovered from the bog. The Guardian wrote that they were found in a, quote, shallow grave on the edge of a peat bog surrounded by thick gorse, up a rough track from an Irish border town so insubstantial that it fails to warrant mention on road maps. Gerald, or Jerry Evans, was from Crossmaglen in County Armagh. He was described as a quiet lad who liked a game of cards. On March 27, 1979, he went out for a meal and a few drinks in Castleblaney. At around 10:30, he announced he was tired and opted to go home and skip the pub. He decided he would hitchhike home, which would have been normal enough back then. The following morning, his mother Mary went into his room to wake him up and saw that the bed hadn't been slept in. She immediately knew that something was wrong. She went to the Gardaí in Castleblaney to report him missing, but they didn't take it seriously, saying that he was a big boy and he would come home when he was ready. One of them even joked that she may find his body in a field. Jerry was never seen alive again, and when the IRA provided a list of individuals to whom they had disappeared in 1999, he wasn't on the list. It wasn't until 2009 where a former member of the South Armagh Brigade gave an interview claiming to have been one of Jerry's executioners. He said that he was part of a 12-strong team of IRA members and they had killed Jerry because they found out that he had been a police informant. The former paramilitary said, quote, he pleaded for mercy, he pleaded not to be killed, and then he said his prayers. He was shot once in the back of the head. Instead of making this killing public to deter other informants, this was done in secrecy because the Evans name is very common in Crossmaglen and there are dozens of families sharing the same name. And this killing could have caused some fighting or alienation of the Evans family name. His body was eventually found in the bogland of Carrick-Robin in County Louth on October 15, 2010. Officials had been searching for 16 months and had excavated and sifted through 4 football fields worth of earth. It was shortly after they announced that they were calling off the search that Jerry's body was found. It would appear that his body was weighed down with stones, and there was evidence pointing to his hands having been tied behind his back. But apart from that, there was no clear sign as to how he died, as too much decomposition had occurred. At the inquest, the state pathologist could not find any gunshots on the bones, but the detective inspector was satisfied that Jerry had met an unnatural and violent end. His elderly mother broke down in tears in the courtroom. Charles, or Charlie Armstrong, was born in Scotland in 1954. His mother died when he was young and he was sent to live with relatives in Crossmaglen. He married a woman named Kathleen and worked as a labourer and mechanic. The two had 5 children together. It was Sunday, August 16th, 1981. Charles left his home with the intention to pick up an elderly neighbour and drive her to Mass. Kathleen would then walk to church and meet him there. She arrived and he was nowhere to be found. The family instantly knew something was amiss. They initially thought that he had gotten into a vehicle accident. They then thought that he had been arrested. They then called the local army barracks and asked if they had taken anyone in over the past day. They said that they hadn't. The family then called the hospitals in the area, but he wasn't there. The only other conclusion was the IRA had taken him. The next day, his car was found across the border in Dundalk. His family felt that police on both sides of the border weren't interested in helping find him, so they took matters into their own hands, putting up posters around towns and villages on both sides of the border. But they were only met with silence. And then in 1999, when the Provisional IRA issued the names of those who they had disappeared, Charles's name wasn't on the list. But his wife, Kathleen, continued to search for him. 2 years later, in 2001, she began to receive anonymous letters to her home. The letters detailed where Charles was buried. But it wasn't an easy job finding him. Digging first began in the summer of 2001 and lasted for 2 weeks before it was called off. Then, 6 years later, Kathleen received another letter and then a third. One had a map on it. So instead of just digging this time, a team of archaeologists were employed who adopted a different methodology, as opposed to the JCB method. Eventually, in 2010, Charles's remains were found in Colga Bog in County Fermanagh. His skull was badly damaged, but it was unclear if this was from blunt force trauma or decomposition. Discharged shotgun residue was found in his car shortly after his disappearance. There really isn't much I could find regarding why Charles was disappeared. I came across one source saying that he had resisted an IRA carjacking, and then a couple of claims that he was informing. But like Charles's family, we will never really know for sure. Eugene Simmons was born in 1955. He lived with his family in Newcastle, County Down, then got married to Frances Ward at the age of 19. The two had 3 children together, but Frances died in 1979, and Eugene remarried Mary McCriskin. On New Year's Eve in 1980, the couple attended a New Year's Eve party at a house. They ended up spending the night there, and the next morning Eugene went off with 2 friends to buy milk and groceries. They stopped into a bar for a drink, and then Eugene left the bar with his friend. He was never seen alive again. It's believed that it was his friends who organised this kidnapping. He was taken on January 1st, and then it's believed that he was killed on January the 11th. There was speculation that he was mixed up with the provisionals, and there were a number of instances where he was picked up by the RUC and UDR, but was never charged. The main rumour that circulated was that he was in the Provisional IRA and had given away the location of bomb-making materials to the British Army. In 1984, a man out walking his dog discovered skeletal remains buried in a bog in Knockbridge in County Louth. The skeleton had been shot once in the head. It was identified as Eugene after his father recognised a golden cross and chain that he always wore around his neck, which belonged to his late wife. I've seen later reports saying that his skull then went missing, but it's all quite unclear. Maura Todd, Eugene's sister, said that her and her family were spat at after his disappearance, as a result of the rumours that he had spoken to the army. She has campaigned for more information regarding Eugene's disappearance, and in December 2025, the findings of Operation Canova were released by the PSNI, which was looking into the agent Steakknife, otherwise known as Freddie Scappaticci. Steakknife was the leader of the IRA's internal security unit, the Nutting Squad. To nut someone is to shoot them in the head. Steakknife was both lead executioner, but was also secretly working as a British agent, selectively telling his handlers information about the movements of the IRA. Details are excruciatingly slow to come out and incredibly convoluted, but it is now believed that Eugene was abducted by the IRA once before in August 1980 and interrogated in relation to his recent arrest by the RUC, where it's believed that the RUC threatened to spread the word that he was an informer if he didn't become an informer for them. It was an unwinnable situation. They essentially bullied him into becoming an informer. It's believed that Steakknife was involved in this interrogation. Eugene was then taken by the IRA again 4 months later on New Year's Day in 1981 and disappeared. It would appear that Steakknife was involved in the initial interrogations, but not the second time. Maura confirmed that while Steakknife was not at the second interrogation, which would see Eugene killed, Steakknife had told his handlers of the abduction and where Eugene was being held. His handlers were the British intelligence agency MI5. This stuff is really important when trying to understand the Troubles. In Maura's own words, you see, Scappaticci was very much involved with Eugene. He interrogated him in August 1980, he and his crew. Whereas, we don't believe Steakknife had anything to do with his actual execution. He knew all about it because he told his handlers. But they chose not to interfere. He told them where he, Eugene, was being held and all the information, but they chose not to go and save him. Are MI5 allowed to be the judge, jury and executioner? Again, this is a crucial point. They knew he was there. Did they allow Eugene to be killed to prevent Stakeknife's identity from being revealed? And MI5 have been extremely slow in assisting Operation Canova. Mora also refuted any of the claims that Eugene was an informer, saying that if the IRA killed an informer, they would usually kill them and leave them at the side of a road for all to see. Or there would be money in a bank account in his name unaccounted for. His killing, like many others, just doesn't make sense. Danny McElhone was born in 1960 in Belfast. He joined the IRA and ended up based in Ballymun in Dublin. On May the 12th, 1981, he was abducted by the IRA and questioned in relation to the theft of weaponry from an IRA arms dump. He was brought to Blessington in County Wicklow, where the IRA had a training camp. There, he was interrogated. He ended up fighting with his captors and was shot several times, fatally wounding him. He was then secretly buried. Then in 1999, the IRA named him as one of the disappeared, saying he wasn't an informer, but that he had been involved in an internal dispute. It would take another decade before his body was finally discovered. And like all the others, it was a significant operation, involving dividing and mapping out the suspected area, forensic investigators, ground radar, scanners, probes, and cadaver dogs. His body was finally discovered in 2008 when, during a dig, a cowboy boot was discovered, which his brother recognised. Further remains were found which were a strong DNA match for being Daniel. His parents had both passed away by the time he was recovered. Seamus Ruddy is a unique case, as he was not disappeared by the Provisional IRA, but rather he was disappeared by the other Republican paramilitary group, the INLA. And the disappearing occurred outside of Ireland. Seamus was born in 1952 in Northern Ireland, and as he grew up, he was heavily influenced by the sense of injustice against the Catholic population in the late 60s. He initially joined People's Democracy, a student-led civil rights group, and then moved on to joining the IRSP, which were the Irish Republican Socialist Party, a small Marxist-Leninist political party in Ireland focusing on achieving a united socialist Irish Republic. He soon joined their paramilitary wing, the INLA, and became a dedicated member, and built relationships with socialist groups all over Europe. In one instance, he was arrested on the border between Greece and Turkey for possession of weapons, but he was acquitted. In 1979, he was caught attempting to smuggle arms and hand grenades into Ireland, and he served some time in prison for this. Upon his release, he moved to Paris, securing work as an English teacher, and it would appear that he had left his time in the INLA behind, believing that they were moving away from their original cause and descending further and further towards criminality. Back home in Ireland, the INLA was fragmenting and was marred by continuous infighting. In 1984, Belfast INLA man John O'Reilly seized control of the group, and he and a number of lieutenants ended up travelling to Paris to seek out Seamus. They believed that he knew where arms dumps were hidden in France, and that he had access to arms smuggling networks around Europe. If you think back to the episode with the Padre, Father Patrick Ryan, and his network of smugglers around Europe and the Middle East, these were tight-knit networks that took years and years to gain the trust of. It would appear that Seamus had gained that trust, and it wasn't as easy to recreate for O'Reilly, who needed the weapons. They were also paranoid and suspicious that Seamus was supplying weapons to their enemies, the Dublin INLA. Seamus was wary about the meeting, but met with them in a bar in Paris in 1985. He was then kidnapped and brought to an apartment where he was beaten, interrogated, and then executed. He was then secretly buried somewhere in the French countryside. Cecilia Moore was Seamus's girlfriend and lived with him in Paris. She was back in Ireland at the time and received a call from friends in Paris saying that Seamus hadn't been seen for days. She flew back and heard that a friend of theirs, who was also a member of the IRSP, had been seen leaving their apartment, which was odd because he didn't have a key. Some items were also missing from their apartment. She set up a meeting with an INLA member in Paris and asked him where Seamus was. In her own words, quote, "He said Seamus's disappearance had nothing to do with the INLA and, if I kept making crazy accusations, I'd get them all arrested. He was heartless. He said Seamus was back in Ireland. I said his passport was still in our Paris apartment. Maybe he swam home," he replied. Back home in Ireland, Seamus's family were concerned. French officials had made contact with them after a bag of clothes had been found in the River Seine, and they were asking someone to come over and see if they belonged to Seamus. Seamus's siblings, Anne and Sean, said that they would travel over and identify them. Anne decided, just to be safe, to have a meeting with the INLA in Ireland and tell them that they were heading over. Quote, "At that meeting, this guy just pointed to me and said, 'If you go to Paris, you're dead.' And then pointed to my brother and said, 'You're dead.' And he said, 'All of your family circle are under threat.' I just said, 'Well, I'm going to Paris to see my brother's clothes. I will be going. He's my brother and I'm searching for him. I'm not searching for an ex-member of your group or anything else. We will be going to Paris.' And just like that, me and my brother stood up and left the room." The family said that if they were uncertain before this meeting if the INLA had killed Seamus, they were certain afterwards. In Paris, they had a look at the clothes. There was a jacket with 2 bullet holes in the hood and blood-stained jeans, the same clothes Anne had seen him wearing when she had visited 2 weeks before he disappeared. For a long time afterwards, the INLA continued to threaten Seamus's family back in Ireland, often sticking at their home at night. The INLA finally claimed responsibility for his death in 1995 and promised to help assist the family locate his body. However, their infighting persisted, delaying things. Eventually, in 1999, the Ruddy family met with the IRSP. Someone there, acting on behalf of the INLA, provided a map to the family as to where Seamus was buried. Many unsuccessful digs were carried out there between 1999 and 2008. Then, in May 2017, his remains were finally found in a forest near Rouen in northern France, 40 yards away from the original search location. The remains of Seamus Ruddy had finally been found. We're coming close to the end of this episode now, and the final person I'll be including in this list is Lisa Dorian. She would be on the edge of the list as her case is outside the remit of the Disappeared Commission, having occurred after the Troubles. The Disappeared Commission was set up under some very specific legal conditions, so legally I don't believe they would be allowed to take this disappearance under their wing. Lisa Dorian was born in the Northern Irish town of Bangor in 1979. In the year 2004, she broke up with her boyfriend and began spending time with a new group of friends, and Lisa's family alleged that they were a group of drug users. It's believed that she began taking ecstasy and amphetamines, which were being supplied by loyalist paramilitaries. It wasn't exactly uncommon for some paramilitary groups to move towards drug dealing in the wake of the end of the Troubles. On the weekend she went missing, she'd spent Friday and Saturday night out with her friends, and then on Sunday, for an after party, she ended up in an empty caravan park. There were around 12 people at the park. Eventually, most people left, and the only 2 remaining were Lisa and the 17-year-old groundskeeper. They were both under the influence of drugs. Then, 2 days later, Lisa's sister Joanne got a phone call. It was Lisa's flatmate saying that she hadn't been home. She called Lisa's number but nobody answered, and they quickly realised that the groundskeeper was the last person seen with her. Joanne called him and he was in a fearful and distressed state, saying that at 4:45 a.m. they saw flashing noises and lights outside the caravan park. The 2 of them were scared and ran out of the park, and in the darkness they lost track of each other. Lisa was never seen again after this. The investigation into the disappearance was odd, and detectives were met with a wall of silence from the people who had attended the party on the night she disappeared. A number of arrests were made, but those arrested were soon released. Like many of these people who were disappeared, this should probably be a full episode, so I am brushing over the details a little bit here. But over the years, the speculation as to what happened to Lisa continued to grow. The PSNI believe that her body may have been stored for a while before potentially being dumped at sea. Then there were stories about Lisa owing drug dealers some money, and that she was abducted and subjected to a punishment beating where she was accidentally killed. Shortly after she went missing, graffiti started to appear in the area, accusing the paramilitary group, the Loyalist Volunteer Force, as being responsible for the killing, specifically 2 LVF drug dealers from East Belfast. There was also speculation that powerful figures in loyalism were intimidating witnesses into silence about the case. The PSNI ruled in 2021 that they had no proof of loyalist involvement, but the rumours persist. As of 2025, the case is still being investigated, And in December of this year, a 69-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of the murder, but he was released a few days later. As of writing, the case still remains open. This brings us to the end of this episode about the disappeared. In this episode, we covered the 17 ones that have been investigated by the Commission, as well as the disappearance of Lisa Dorian. There are more I could cover, but this has been a significant episode already. There were a lot of reasons these people were disappeared. People were informing, or the security services put them in impossible positions, knowing full well they could be killed for it. Or simply people broke paramilitary rules. On the side of the Provisional IRA, it was easy to provide justification for their actions by claiming the person was informing. This would be something that today is impossible to prove. The Disappeared Commission has done an exceptional job at finding these bodies. Thanks to their work, Charles Armstrong and Jerry Evans were recovered in 2010, Seamus Ruddy in 2017, Seamus Wright and Kevin McKee in 2015, Brendan McGrath in 2014, Peter Wilson in 2010, Danny McElhone in 2008, and finally, Eamon Malloy, John McClory and Brian McKinney in 1999. As of writing, 4 bodies still remain undiscovered. Joe Linsky, Columba McVeigh, Robert Nyrak and Seamus Maguire. But digs are ongoing and continue every year until these 4 people are brought home. Anyone with information regarding the 4 outstanding disappeared cases should contact the Disappeared Commission on 00353 1 602 8655. Or they can email secretary@iclvr.ie. Or they can even write a letter delivered to ICLVR PO Box 10827, Dublin, Ireland. So that's it from me. Thanks and see you next time. Just a quick heads up that if you're enjoying this podcast and want to support what I can do, you can do so over at patreon.com/The Troubles Podcast. There, for the price of a pint or a coffee, you can become a Patreon, and you'll get access to hundreds of videos and some Patreon exclusive episodes, including ones focused on music of the Troubles. I've also released an episode focusing on Bloody Sunday in 1920. The Patreon is a really great place, and I love interacting with Patreons, and without them, this podcast really wouldn't be possible. So if you want to support this podcast, head on over to patreon.com/The Troubles Podcast and jump onto one of the paid tiers. And if you're not in a place to do that right now, then simply tell a friend or leave a review. Everything helps. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.